This part off. We're live. Okay. Is this on? Hello? Is this on? I've done this before, I swear. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It is a rainy day in New York City, and I know that there are so many events and so many obligations, so you being here really means a lot. I see some of my closest friends and new friends and people that I have admired for a very long time that I am so grateful that they are making the time today to chat about their careers. So the talk show that I started is one that was very close to my heart during the pandemic, and it's sort of evolved over the past couple of years, but the mission really was to give a platform to Asian creators and people who I felt deserved more attention in the mainstream media, but wasn't really, they weren't able to because of the way that the media works, which we will talk about tonight. And so this is really a mission of love and something that I wanted to do specifically with the Welcome to Chinatown team because they are about community. And I want to thank Vic and Harry and Erica and Jackie who made this happen. They have created this beautiful space for really anyone to create events like this. And so I wanted to have all the ticket sales go toward them, and hopefully we can do more of these to raise money for them at this really important time, because as we all know, a lot of the funding, it's getting cut. It's also, a time when people are cutting back on their expenses as well. And so just anything I think would help, and I really wanted to give them a birthday party because it's been 5 years since they started, and they've built this from the ground up. They did not truly celebrate in a way that I think I would have loved to see them do, but of course resources are really strapped right now. So just thank you to Vic and the whole team for having me. So the theme for tonight is to really put the spotlight on two specific journalists who I have admired for a really long time through their work. I have felt like they have been working on AAPI issues for so long, and even though the attention was on them in the height of the pandemic, I feel like years have passed and they're still doing the work, and I wanted to celebrate them as well. So tonight is really about giving them that spotlight to celebrate, appreciate, and honor community-driven work, which is really what Welcome to Chinatown is all about. And so my first guest tonight, I am very honored to sit down with CeFaan Kim. He is a journalist with ABC7. This is his 10-year anniversary, I believe, with the network. Yes, absolutely. Congratulations. His reporting has spanned some of the most pivotal moments of the past decade, from presidential elections to the Black Lives Matter movement, and of course to the past few years and the devastating impact on Asian American communities from the pandemic. So just to give you some credentials, not that he needs an introduction, but I really wanted to share this. He is a 2-time recipient of the National Edward R. Murrow Award, which is one of the most prestigious awards for a broadcast journalist, and that is for his work during the pandemic. And he also has multiple Emmys for his coverage of the Black Lives Matter protests, as well as another regional award from his work on anti-Asian hate. So I am really excited to finally meet him, but more importantly, getting to know him. So CeFaan, welcome to the show. So, I think the most important question that I've always wondered is just how you're doing. And, the past 5 years.
I'm vertical and I'm alive. It's a good thing, yes.
Yeah. But, the half of the time that you spent at ABC7 has really been covering the pandemic, the effects, and especially all of the stories around the crimes in this community specifically. And so I know that in the past you've talked about how every story is personal to you. You can relate to it, but that it does embed trauma inside of you. And so that's really where I wanted to start the conversation tonight.
Start soft, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly.
Good. The question is,
how are you? How are you doing?
I'm alive and vertical.
But I mean, outside of that, I mean, how do you cope with the effects of watching the footage, of talking to the victims, and sometimes of seeing there be inaction on the parts of policymakers, you know, of even communities to actually support and change?
Let's be clear, like what we do, particularly in local news, what you're describing extends beyond Asian hate and the AAPI community, right? Like we cover a lot of crime, crime heavy in local news, and with that comes a lot of imagery like that and a lot of injustice like that. So just to sort of broaden out the question, that is just something that we have to be equipped to do, whether that's during that moment or not. To answer your question on how do we cope, it's a lot of ways, sometimes not well. You know, therapy's good. It's good to, so there are a lot of journalists, I think, in this line of work that, as a defense mechanism, they learn to block it out, and that's understandable because you can't take that home every day, otherwise it'll ruin your life, right? I sort of have a different approach to it where I allow it in because if you look at my storytelling, particularly during that time, I think that you can notice that it was personal, not even necessarily in the AAPI way, but in a human way, right? Because I'm telling a human story, and if you don't feel human emotion, then you're not telling a story, right? And that comes at a cost, as you mentioned. Allowing it in allows you to be a better storyteller, but it can break you, right? So particularly during that coverage, I remember 2 or 3 or 4 moments, which were rare, when things were quiet in a lull. Out of nowhere, I would just start crying. Didn't know why, of course I knew why, right? It was so relentless during that 5-6 month period that so much of it was just putting one foot in front of the other and not even thinking about necessarily the emotional toll it was taking on me, right? It was mechanical. But then suddenly on a Saturday morning when you have some time, it can hit you like a wave, right? And so what I did during that time was I allowed myself the license to feel, because you have to feel. If you don't, then you're just a robot, right? So that's one way. I think the other way is I look at the glass half full. I tend to be a glass half full kind of person. In my line of work, you're often around death and tragedy in the strangest, most random ways. I have this strange occupational hazard where I have to approach people often for the first time ever on what might have been their worst day in their lives, which is not a fun occupational hazard to have. But it reminds me that life being so fragile and so temporary, every day you wake up is a gift. I hate to sound cliche, right? But what I see reminds me that what I have is precious and I have it today, and I look at it positively in that way.
What do you mean when you say that you let it in? What parts of the story or what aspects of the reporting process do you let in so that you're not, maybe from another colleague's perspective, blocking? The
pain and the anger that subsequently comes with it. I'm Korean. I was born Korean, so I was born angry. So luckily for me, that comes naturally. So often I've used anger and fire to fuel and motivate, and pain can get me very hot. So it served me well sometimes, yeah.
How do you keep it together on air? I mean, there are times when...
Is that what it looks like to you, keeping it together on air?
I mean, look, it's very different, right? I mean, like, you have to be composed in the moment and when you're delivering it.
Sure. It's just practice, right? I mean, like, it's like any other muscle memory. You exercise a muscle, whether it's your biceps or your vocal cords or your presentation skills, and you do it enough, and, you know, it's fact-based reporting is actually quite easy, if you think about it, right? Like, I'm not worrying about anyone's opinions. It's just who, what, when, where, why, right? I am delivering to you, like, the bare essential facts, and yes, they may focus on the emotional aspect of a story, but that's still a fact, right? Like, if a mother loses a child, and I tend to focus on that mother's loss, that may be emotional, but it's still a fact that she's feeling loss, right? So it's still a fact-based reporting.
Did you ever keep track of how many stories you've actually filed?
I didn't keep track, but I know that it's over 50 or so that made it on air. What people don't know is
Specifically
that
on the
Asian hate, right?
Over 5 years.
No, just that 5 months. Just that 5 months.
In 2020.
In 2021, I think it was, right? Am I doing the math right?
Okay.
Right. So it's January 21 to about
50
that
stories
summer.
in 5 months.
5 or 6 months. But that doesn't count for the hundreds that never made air. So what people don't realize is that not everyone, for obvious reasons, is comfortable putting their face on these incidents, right? And just because you don't want to go on the record doesn't mean that I'm not going to guide you towards justice somehow, right? There are ways behind the scenes that you can connect victims with the resources. There are even some victims that just want to be heard. That just, I mean, you act as a therapist, right? You just want to hear them and they want to be heard. There's probably hundreds of those that never made air, some of which may have been more impactful than some of the ones that did make air. Yeah. You
have 2 daughters?
I do.
What do you hope that they take away from your work?
That is an interesting question. So to be clear, my daughters are 6 and 7 months old. So they're not at the age where when they go, Daddy, what did you do today? I can go, yeah, I saw a guy die. So I think about this sometimes. I think there's probably 2 things. So my oldest, I don't know what my 7-month-old's gonna be like, but it's just too young, right? My oldest is a rule follower, like to the degree where like it's awesome as a dad that you listen to me and like you follow all the rules, but it sucks like thinking that one day she may be someone who is afraid to bend the rules, right? And I say this, I guess, as a journalist at heart. So I was in the military, and it served me very poorly, right?
Oh, it did?
It was terrible.
Wait, why?
Because a good soldier is one that takes orders and just listens and follows orders, right? Journalists tend to challenge authority at every turn, right? I mean, I go up against mayors, DAs, governors, right? It doesn't matter, right? I don't really care how much power you have. Like, I'm coming for you, right? So imagine that mindset in the Army. It did not go well. We'll go back to that. But the point is, so as a journalist and just growing up, this might lose me some followers. I was born and raised in Philly. I'm not a New Yorker, right?
That's okay.
Right. So I grew up like scrapping, right? I grew up like being reminded every day that I was different, and I lived this life in this occupation knowing that the rules are not built for a guy that looks like me, right? In order for me to get where I got, I had to learn to break some rules and to bend some rules and to get some attention. And my fear sometimes, my daughter will watch this one day maybe, is that she's afraid to stand up for herself in that sense, right? So I hope that she takes away from my work and that coverage is, one, is that you stand up for yourself. And I think the second thing is that, and this, I guess, comes with bias in general, only you define your own value and your worth. Don't allow someone else to define that for you.
Just going back to the military experience just a little bit, are there parallels at all between your training, what you experienced there, and how you deal with the front line of news?
No, what I mentioned was like not, good for me. The parallel is sort of the way we operate in the field, right? So the photographer you just saw walk out, big scary guy. Yeah. So we sort of run out in the field like with partners, if you will, right? We have a photographer, we have a crew. It's not unlike law enforcement work in some ways, right? You have partner, you sit in a patrol car. In the military, you're sort of trained to like have someone watch your back. So there is that aspect of it where you rely, like your safety and well-being, you have to put that in the hands of the person that you're with all day long. And you can be in situations that are volatile and unpredictable, and oftentimes, as I mentioned, involve human emotion, which can add a component to it that is very unpredictable. There's also an element of just, I guess, that part of it, right? Like we don't sit in an office all day, right? So we don't necessarily know all the time when the news will happen, right? So the military does give you this mindset of like preparedness, just like it can be very boring for a long time. The terminology is like hurry up and wait, right? You just have to be in position and then who knows how many hours until something actually happens, right? So there's a few things I think that have some parallels. the way we sort of operate, but the mentality was totally different.
But it was when you realized that you didn't want to follow rules and you wanted to actually challenge authority, because you also went to journalism school.
So to be clear, I did not enlist in the military because I'm like patriotic. And I'm not saying that I don't love this country.
Right.
Don't cancel me. I am older than I look, and so I enlisted in the year 2000, pre 9/11. This was during the Bill Clinton GI Bill days. Everybody that I went into the military with at the time was doing it to pay for college tuition, right? The world changed a year later, where suddenly and that was a weird time in the Army where there's half of us that were here for, for those reasons. And then another half that wanted to, like go to Afghanistan, right? So I knew going in, this wasn't a career. It was more like, I'm Korean, right? So my parents in Korea, if you don't know, every male serves. It's mandatory, right? And so and I went to an expensive school, and my parents are like, do your duty,
Right.
Pay for school. Like, you weren't smart enough to get a full ride, so you got to do something about it. And so I did that. And it was an experience that I would not take back. I was encouraged to re-enlist. There was no way I was doing that, but I wouldn't take it back. I had a news director one time ask me on the resume, like, that's interesting, like, what's that about, right? And he asked me, what is one thing about your time in the military that serves you well here? And I gave him sort of the easy answer, which was, there are times when, like, you could be covering a blizzard, which we love doing in this business, right? And when I'm getting pelted with snow and you guys are all laughing at home and warm on your couch, we are miserable out there, right? We're in like minus whatever degrees. And I told them, look, I can always think back when you have other reporters complaining that I have had it worse than this. Like, so there's nothing like knowing your limits psychologically, emotionally, physically. Like, when you're going to break. And if you know where that limit is, like, that can serve you well.
But you also build up that resilience over time, the muscle memory that you were talking about earlier. I imagine that you can cope with more, or you can handle more of the burden.
On this job?
Yes, on this job.
Sure, because I've done it for a very long time, as you've duly noted.
Yeah.
Yes,
well,
I'm
I mean,
old.
in a great way. I mean,
Yes.
I think. My last question really is, what keeps you showing up to this? I mean, you've been personally injured on the job. You've been hospitalized due to an attack. You've been called horrible names, racial slurs. And a lot of people leave journalism after 5-6 years.
Yep.
They go into PR, they go into marketing. And so that's something that I'd really love to learn is why you stay doing your job.
Well, it's fun, first of all, which makes me out of control. No, but it's the stories, right? Look, I got into this. I'm weird. Like, so I grew up in Philly, and at some point when I was getting my ass kicked in, I don't know, maybe 4th grade, my parents were atypical Asian parents, where they didn't force me to be a lawyer or doctor or whatever. They would say to me, like, making money doesn't earn your respect, right? And you learn that when you have fist pounding on your head, that it doesn't matter, right? And so in the 1980s, not to date myself, when broadcast news still mattered, I would sit there and I'd see the TV on, and I'd see the newscaster, and back then there were no images, people like us who, were on the big screen, right? That was basically right? So I thought, okay, if one day I could be in your living room in a role where I didn't have an accent, and you're trusting me with your day, and I'm accepted as a part of your fabric of society, maybe, just maybe, if your parents had the news on and saw this face, that you won't go to school the next day and kick the other Asian kid's ass, right? And so that was middle school. And so it's a long way of saying that I did it for reasons that sound cheesy now, but there's still stories to tell. There's still reasons to show up. And even if I'm not doing an AAPI story, it's still this face, right? And I firmly believe that just being out there can make a difference somehow in some small way.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now I wish I was beaten up more as a kid. I don't know. These are great
Try it out
lessons.
sometime.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not too late.
No,
Not too late.
reality smacks you in the face, potentially. We're going to have you back on,
Okay.
CeFaan. Thank you so much for taking the time for the one-on-one. We're going to, yes, you can clap, for sure. Huge role model. Thank you. So our next media hero to celebrate tonight, and that is the theme of this evening, is New York City media heroes. Kimmy Yam is an award-winning journalist. She covers Asian America for NBC News, and her focus is on the intersections of race, culture, and politics. Her work has ranged from deep dives into Florida's controversial land laws prohibiting Chinese citizens from owning land in the state to thoughtful profiles like one on baseball legend Ichiro Suzuki. And before joining NBC, this is what I find most fascinating, Kimmy actually co-founded Asian Voices at HuffPost, where she led coverage of issues disproportionately affecting the Asian American community. Please welcome Kimmy to the stage. So maybe you can still use his mic and sit closer if you want. Here, this one was on. Yeah. So you were also somebody that I have admired from afar, and
That's
you,
so kind.
you and CeFaan, because there aren't very many women Asian journalists in the newsroom. But specifically, when you launched AAPI Voices or Asian Voices at HuffPost, that was a really, really big deal. And I really want to start there because a lot of times I still struggle to kind of get stories about our community to the front page or even to get greenlit. And so I'm wondering how and if you actually encountered any friction in trying to launch it.
Yeah, I remember even applying to HuffPost at the time, like when I was in college. I remember looking at their front page, and they had, a voices section for every identity, as in parents, women, the LGBTQ community, just everyone kind of had a section, and there was a glaring kind of omission on that page. And I always felt that was so strange. And so when I was applying, I was always thinking about whether or not there'd be an opportunity to do something because, there's an obvious disparity there. When it came time to launch, I do think that we, especially my editor, who's my editor today, she's the editorial director of NBC Asian America, Jessie Price. I think it's kind of the issue that so many other Asian Americans have when it does come to trying to get your stories out there, which is that because there is this model minority myth or this idea that, Asian Americans are basically white, then what do you have to complain about? Yeah. What do you have to talk about? How is your community different from any of this mainstream anything? I think that because of our wealth disparity and because there is a lot slanted towards those who have a lot and so many who don't, it looks like the community overall is doing super well. So it's what would there be, is there any substance to report on? And I think that was always difficult in trying to break down those misconceptions in the beginning. It was difficult in the beginning, and I think it takes a lot of just kind of telling yourself that no matter what the perception is, that you are right, you have the research to back it up, that it's accurate, and that you should continue moving forward no matter what the perception is out there.
So how long did it take you to launch Asian Voices?
It's such a blur.
Yeah, no,
it was long ago. I was so
Did you
so
join with
little.
the intention of launching it almost when you saw the gap?
When I joined with the intention of having, asking for an opportunity to write in that space. And I wanted to write about race. And this is a time when I felt like journalism in 2014, 2015, when there was race reporting, a lot of it was off vibes, I think a lot of it was about personal experience, personal stories, things like that. And those are all so important. But the data tells a very different story that I think a lot of Americans have no clue about. When we're talking about, whether it is, I'm covering a lot of immigration and a lot of higher education these days. So in terms of deportations and things like that and what's happening in the Southeast Asian community, I don't feel like mainstream America understands, or, there's just so many statistics that really back up, that pieces together the true image of Asian America that I did not feel like was there at the time.
But ultimately, what convinced them? I mean, I think it's also telling that you were maybe one of the only people who saw the gap. They saw all these other communities and said, let's launch Voices for them, but that nobody at the time spoke up for the Asian American community.
I do think that success in this business is always the biggest indicator, you know? And I think that that's why you see a lot of studios as well. After like Crazy Rich Asians come out, there's all these studios that try to replicate the same sort of formula over and over and over because they have some sort of success story. I think for us, one of my earliest stories was about publishing the Asian American poverty rate in New York City and how it was the highest among all racial groups. But of course, it's not something that you're ever going to assume, you know, because if you go down to Wall Street, I feel like you see all these Asians like, you know, with their briefcases and you're like, oh, they're fine.
Yeah.
But, you know, after seeing the success of pieces like that, I think it was very convincing to upper management that something like this was going to be very successful. And I think that also it helps that my editor was very, very, you know, strong and just kind of advocating for, you know, my ideas, for the ideas of Asian Americans around the newsroom and saying, you know, this is worth it. This is worth, you know, being on that page, being on the front page kind of thing.
And to be clear, is your editor Asian?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you think that's what it kind of takes, is somebody in a leadership position who is Asian to understand, or do you see more of an understanding or empathy that extends beyond now, like race in the newsroom, the leadership level specifically?
Nowadays, like at NBC, I feel that I've always been very, very accepted. I don't feel that I've had to really make a case for a story, and I don't feel that it's ever been like, I don't think that any of my ideas have ever been reduced because it's an Asian American story or anything like that. And I really do think that times have changed because there's a lot less kind of advocating you have to do and justifying you have to do. I think that people are kind of understanding that in order to paint a very accurate picture of society, that really does mean being inclusive. That means that coverage of everyone. It definitely, you know, wasn't before at the time, but, you know, I think now at NBC it's a very different situation. But I also think that, you know, we need everyone in the community to kind of understand how important media coverage is, media literacy, all of these things. But it's also extremely important that people outside of the community also learn from that. And it's, you know, like, as an Asian American, I don't only read Asian American news, and I don't think non-Asians should not read Asian American news. They have to be consuming that. They have to be learning as well. And so I think it's been so important that both people in the community advocate for ourselves. People outside of the community have to, you know, also buy in.
What do the stats tell you about the actual readership? Sometimes I feel like I'm just writing for like and I love all my friends, but like sometimes I feel like beyond my friends, beyond people in the Asian community, like am I reaching outside for the audiences that do need to become more aware? So do you see the stats showing that it's reaching beyond the Asian community, these stories that you're writing?
Yeah,
great. That's
absolutely. And I do think that, you know, it's also like in part due to the NBC machine. It's so big, you know, and there's a lot of promotion there. But at the same time, I think that because we've been very, very clear in that every issue is in some way an Asian American issue, you know, like when we're talking about higher education, immigration, you know, healthcare, all of these things, it's not just Asian hate, you know? I think that that was a huge misconception when a lot of that news was boiling or bubbling up. People thought that that was like our only thing, you know? Yeah. And I think it took a lot to break that down and say, we're relevant in all these realms of society. There are so many gaps across these different areas that need to be, you know, covered in a thoughtful way. And so in doing that and in telling people, okay, we are in all these aspects, and there are issues that we have to talk about every single day across so many different topics, that people were like, okay, like, you know, this is bigger than just one thing, you know, this extends across all aspects of life.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to you and CeFaan about this exact thing where, you know, if the story isn't about someone who was brutalized, or if it's not the month of May,
yeah,
newsrooms don't know how or when to come in if they don't have the right types of journalists on staff. So I definitely want to chat with you and CeFaan in the next panel about this. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about you. You didn't study journalism in school. You were at Georgetown and you studied foreign service. And I think one thing that I've always been drawn to you for is that you have always done your own thing. You've always just sort of been yourself, and I feel like I'm more like CeFaan's daughter, where I like follow a lot of rules, and like I did work in finance, so like these are all things that like I did to try to be like a good Asian. But you know, you were on my friend Lynn's podcast, Rock the Boat, and you talked about struggling with your Asian identity growing up in an upstate New York, and especially as like a restaurant kid, and then you finally reclaimed it. How did you reclaim your Asian identity after trying to struggle with it when you were younger?
I honestly think that a lot of journalism helped with that. You know, I think that there is something to be said about entering a field that you feel very much at home. And so when you do that, when you have that sort of like comfort or safety, you feel that you can be yourself. And I did not feel that in college. I did not feel that in high school. And I think that helped me kind of realize that there was a safe space to kind of excavate a lot of these feelings that I had growing up and try to understand, you know, how do I feel about myself? How do I feel about my culture? It's really difficult to do if you're growing up in upstate New York where, you know, less than 1% of our town is Asian. You know, it's like very difficult to do because there is no safety net. There is no support there. And so I think that honestly, this industry has given me so much, but I think the confidence aspect is something that I could never, you know, I could never repay enough to journalism because of that.
That's so fascinating. I've almost had the opposite experience myself, but I want to get back to maybe one or two of the examples that you can think of where you worked through a story and it gave you that confidence. I'm so curious what those experiences were for you.
You know, I love really like in-depth investigative reporting. I think that understanding that I know how to, you know, sort through just hundreds of pages of numbers to try to, you know, find the data, you know, piece together a story and figure out what that actually looks like. Like, I do get proud that I'm able to do that, and I am happy at the end of the day that particularly when we live in a world that is very, very like led by personalities, especially now, it's like very much influencer personality led. When you're able to do work that you find like empirical evidence, things like that, I think that is so important, and I'm proud of that. I'm very proud that I've never reported off of vibes, you know, like there's always something to back it up. And so I think that that's helped. Another thing, and especially at NBC, I think that coming into this industry, you understand that as a woman, everyone hates you. On the internet, people hate you. Yeah. People don't want you there. Like the amount of like horrific things that I've received throughout my career, just like in my Instagram DMs, people would like, you know, like message my husband, things like that, you know. It's just throughout my career, it's been awful, awful things. And then, so to know that I've come to a place, and I don't feel that they don't respect me because I'm a little younger than a lot of people there, or I am a woman. I report quite a bit on sports when I can. And, you know, when we're like walking around in New York, and I have like, you know, my Yankee stuff on, people are never ever going to, like a fellow Yankee fan isn't gonna like turn to my husband and talk to him because he's just gonna assume that a woman can't possibly know anything, you know?
Right.
Like, if anything, he'll just start explaining the game to me. But at NBC, I've always felt that they're like, you're our baseball reporter, you know? Or like, you will go out, like, anything that is very male dominated, we have the utmost confidence that you can actually get the job done. And I think that that has helped so much. Like I do feel that when I'm doing my job, I have a confidence that I sometimes don't necessarily even have like in my everyday life.
I just love that you are all about substance, but it's actually like the vibe as well. Like I've studied, like I'm like low key your stalker. Like I've like studied your social media, like the way you curate your feed and your grid and what you post. I mean, that's the kind of boldness that I've always like been afraid of, because I get the same thing. And so now I just stop posting because I don't want the DMs and I don't want the retweets and the reposts, whatever they're calling it these days on X. How do you deal with that barrage? Is it sort of like, CeFaan gets it in the physical sense because he's out with his camera, and you get it online because, you're so, you have a big following yourself. So what do? Do you mute? Do you just, you don't read the comments?
I mean, what you mentioned just now about how you're kind of, minimizing your presence or minimizing your footprint. I think I've learned to do that as well. It's a shame because, in the beginning, I think that I felt the internet was like a place where if you are vulnerable, you'll have an exchange with strangers in which they will also feel a safetiness to be vulnerable as well. And, people might praise you in the beginning, but as soon as, there's a story that they don't like, or as soon as, even if it's like a haircut they don't like, or I've gotten hate mail over the wedding dress I wore, like things like that. As soon as they find something that they dislike about you, then any vulnerability that you've shown on the internet is turned around and like pointed towards you, and you're basically just made to feel stupid that you ever shared. And so I think over time I have, as well kind of minimized my digital footprint, and I don't want to do that.
Okay.
It's super like lame, but it's just something that you learn to protect yourself, especially if you want like a happy outside life, because you need your peace.
So it is intentional, because I think you've only got like a couple of photos on your grid. I think you've got your Twitter locked down.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, I'm very grateful that you're talking here, but you don't do a lot of these things. Is that for that purpose of personal safety?
Yeah. Personal safety, peace. I think a lot of it too is just like, like as a reporter, I think it's so beautiful that, we are celebrated when there is a story that does really well and things like that. But at the same time, I've always felt extremely uncomfortable with the concept that people have made their careers off of war reporting, have made their careers off of trauma and crisis, and I never wanted to make it seem like my career was skyrocketing because people were getting beat up and deported, So I think that after, I'd thought about it for a couple years, and I just kind of felt that if I just take myself out of the equation more and let the story speak for itself, I think that is the most powerful way to do it. And I think that a lot of people assume that I'm not there,
What do you mean they assume you're not there?
That my social media presence is no longer there, that I'm like a very irrelevant person. It's a very intentional thing. Like, you probably wouldn't know now, but I have a story that's like top on the site. But you would never think that there's a story that's going viral right now, because I'm not gonna share it. It's just gonna do its thing. If enough people read it, then enough people will be concerned, and then it will do its work. I don't think that I have to advocate for myself as much, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so different, because I think a lot of us are taught, promote yourself everywhere, and I feel like I'm not good enough at that. And so it's funny that you're taking the complete opposite approach, and you're letting the work speak for itself. And I know you're not on LinkedIn either, because I was on, she literally, her LinkedIn bio says, I'm not on LinkedIn, thank you. So, I love the transparency there, but I think that's really refreshing. And it almost sounds like what CeFaan was saying earlier, which is like, just you let the work, as he's working through a story, it's a muscle memory, and you kind of go through it, and it's almost, mechanical, and it's precision, and it's, versus kind of being really personal. Really appreciate you spending this one-on-one time. I want to bring CeFaan back on, because there's some questions that I feel like both of you could definitely, here, if you want your mic back. One of the challenges, I think, of being the only a few is that you got to be on panels like this. You gotta do May is a really tough month when you're, in this category. What do you guys hate about doing like this? Like when you have to like get these invites and you're like, do you kind of groan? Is it something like that you actually look forward to? Like I'm always curious how other people feel when they are being asked, because I get my fair share as well. So I know this is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of question, but yeah, is there anything that you both hate about doing panels like this?
Well, man, I love yours.
Oh, thank you.
No, I mean, I just don't do it if I don't want to do it. So if I show up because I wanted to.
Constance Wu has this thing that she used to say that you get like rep sweats, like sweats from representation. Like you're sweating because you got to like represent, like they push you out and you're like, and I don't know if you guys relate to that concept at all, where you feel like you have to represent, tens of millions of Americans who are Asian American. Do you ever feel that way?
I feel like maybe very early in my career I did, but I do think that true equity in this space means that we don't care. Like white people get to go out there, like whatever they do does not define an entire race. Unfortunately, we feel that when there is, a horrific news story, even when there were those horrible shootings 2 years ago around Chinese New Year, and the shooters were Asian American, it felt like every Asian American I knew was so worried that people would then think that they are violent and that they're, pro, firearm everything. And I think that the true equity means that you're not seen that way and you don't care, And it's not about breaking a stereotype and it's not about adhering a stereotype. It's just about existing, Because even if you do break a stereotype and you're considered like bad, that's still trying to kind of, it's taking something that has been hoisted upon us, these different stereotypes, and intentionally living your life in a way that's very tiring. It's very taxing. So I think in the end, it's just like, it really doesn't matter. True equity, I think, is just living authentically.
I like that. CeFaan, have you ever felt, I know when you were talking earlier to me about growing up and seeing no one who looked like you on television, when you finally got that chance, I feel like you sort of take on, in some ways, that mission, and like that's something that you can be proud of, but let me know if that's the wrong interpretation of what I heard earlier.
And by the way, like, that line of thought and what Kimmy just said, they're not mutually exclusive.
Sure.
Like, she's absolutely right. Unfortunately, the world doesn't always see that, right? And so while I agree and prescribe to that philosophy, I'm also aware that I am, for better or for worse, representing this idea that people have. So, and absolutely no, but I don't get tired of it, because I think I mentioned this is sort of like fuel. People don't expect you to be like in this position, right? And I've been in places where like they'll pass. It's not the same with her. And the gender thing is a whole different thing, right? But I've been in situations where they'll just pass right by me, like I'm not the guy on TV, right? And it's awesome to like.
Yeah. No, and like, and I think all of us, and most of us in the room are Asian, and so we know that these are individual experiences, and no one on the stage, not me, not CeFaan, not Kimmy, speaks for any of all of us, right? So it's just, I just like to learn about the different perspectives, and again, it's a tough job, it's relentless, and the motivation and drive behind it. As I mentioned, one of the sort of goals of tonight was to really learn about how the world has changed since the pandemic, and sort of the lessons that we have learned and have continued to embrace, but ones that we may have forgotten. CeFaan, you were actually in one of the Twin Towers when the strike happened, and so you've kind of lived in two big shocks. And I'm wondering if you've seen any differences or changes in the way that people behave after an event like that, also after the pandemic, or do we just have now just horrible amnesia or selective amnesia?
You might have been the first person that ever asked me to connect those two events, right? So for people who don't know, I happened to be totally by coincidence in the North Tower that morning of, because I was coming back from a summer at AIT, Fort Lee, Virginia, and my Army Reserve unit was in Jersey City, and so you took the PATH train to World Trade, and long story short. But to answer your question, they're very different, right? Because 9/11, you saw New York and the world come together, and COVID was the opposite. It was like every man for themselves. I mean, it couldn't have been like more different, if you ask me, right? And I was out there on the streets every day of the pandemic, and I saw it, I felt it, I lived it. Like this was like night and day.
Is it because of just the incident itself? Because, you know, health is so divisive and it's personal and individual versus, you know, when you have a national attack like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get attacked by by an entity, right, and you come together, you coalesce, and in the pandemic, it's like the world is ending, or at least you thought, and so you start to act like animals, which ultimately we are, right? So, I mean, let's be honest, and so that brought out our worst human nature.
The other reason why I wanted to bring it up is because media changed a lot because of 9/11. Media changed a lot because of the pandemic. The stock ticker of the news, right, that came about because of 9/11. Then you have everybody going live with their own podcast and live streams like during the pandemic. As both of you are journalists, how have you seen sort of media change since 2020? And again, I'm like obsessed with this idea that there were lessons that I felt like we learned, like mental health breaks and like caring for each other, that sometimes I feel now that we've sort of forgotten about, or we don't have the luxury of holding on. So I'm just curious from your perspectives, what you've seen in your reporting, in your observations of being on this, you know, talking to people every day, what lessons we've learned and what we've gotten from the pandemic.
I do think, and like CeFaan, you'll probably agree with me on this, that I don't know if there was a mental health lesson for journalists at the time. It was kind of just like, please work until you die. But I do think that, well, a couple things. I think there were actually so many parallels between the 9/11 era and COVID, because you do see that after the 9/11 era, you have huge policy changes, you know, at the government level. You have the Bush administration, you know, institute things like NSEERS, which is the National Security Entry Exit Registration System. It's the first iteration of the Muslim registry, right? So you have something like that. Then COVID happens. I think that there was also just this blanket kind of idea that a whole group of people, and again, Asians, a different group of Asians, who were once again like kind of thrust into the spotlight and targeted, you know, scapegoated at that point. I think that was extremely the same. Like, it kind of teaches you that perhaps the rest of, you know, New York probably came together at that point, but there is always, you know, a minority group that gets blamed. There is always a minority group that gets blamed.
You make a really good point. I don't mean to cut you off, but actually I thought that before Asian hate, where people thought it couldn't happen, I said, it happened after 9/11, it'll happen again, right? So I would totally think that's a connection that we, as journalists, are prepared for.
Yeah. I think, Hope, like you mentioned, that health is very personal, and I think post-COVID, a lot of news turned towards personalities, you know? So now you have internet personalities, influencers who do have, you know, are part of like that press pool now. You know, they have a spot now at the White House. They're also in the same room that we are, covering a lot of these pressers and things like that. And I think that that's changed in that there are some people who are doing a great job, but there are a lot of people who I don't, you know, and this is probably the same for you as well, where when we come out with a piece, it's very rigorously edited. You have to be so on point with your facts. You have to know where every single stat comes from. You can't just say things. And there are a lot of people out there who can just say things now. And I think that is the biggest difference, that people can people definitely pick and choose who they want to listen to based on what sounds good to them. And I think that's a huge evolution. I don't know where it's going to go after that. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but I think that's a huge shift that I've noticed since.
That's a really poignant observation. I am curious, you know, I've talked to you both individually about kind of being a journalist in your own individual organizations, but I think at a sort of bigger level, I'm sure people are curious, in newsrooms, what ultimately drives a newsroom to cover AAPI issues? Is it coming from your editors? Is it coming from the journalists? Is it dependent on the economy and how many people they can hire at the time to, you know, cover these spots? Because we know that with the last couple of years, there have been tremendous layoffs, and race reporting has been one of the first beats that are cut. So just from your own experience, where have you seen the most support for coverage of AAPI issues in the newsroom?
Well, so where is it? So I think your question was where does it drive it, right? I mean, we drive it, first of all. Let's just be honest, right? This is why we advocate for diversity in newsrooms, because, you know, the world is not black and white, and you know, you advocate for diversity in newsrooms not because of, like, you know, the token hire, or because of, you know, it's because by having diversity, you have different perspectives, and different perspectives you can cover a city like New York that is full of different communities, right? So to be fair, we drive it. What drives the newsroom is, let's be fair, viewership, right? But the way I pitch a story, and this goes back to what Kimmy was saying, is that I don't say, like, you have an Asian guy who XYZ happened to. Like, it's a dad, right? Like, we, in mainstream media, in corporate media, right, which is what we are, our goal is to have the broadest appeal. So if I pitch a story and I say, oh, you know, an Asian guy, like, you've already lost, like, more than half the audience, right? You got to pitch a good story, and it's got to be a good human story. And then, by the way, he's an Asian. It's kind of an afterthought, right? But that's kind of the point that she's making, is that the more stories that we tell where we are just a dad or the neighbor, that is true equity, right? I go back to, people always ask me, like, what are the stories that stood out to you the most during Asian Hate? And I say, you know, one of the top 5 is one that was at least sensational. Didn't have the crazy video, didn't have, I had an image of the perp, didn't include it, because again, my philosophy then was this was a time to tell our story, not, right? And I never once mentioned in the piece his ethnicity. I mean, the viewer has eyeballs, you can see it, right?
Right.
The beauty of the visual medium is I don't have to say it, right? He was a dad in Central Park enjoying a Saturday morning in spring when he got sucker punched with his kid and his wife there, right? Never mentioned once that he was Asian, didn't have to, right? But the fact that he was just a dad, who can relate to that on a Saturday in April in Central Park, right? That's what humanizes us. So to answer your question in short, we drive it, right? Because these stories matter to us.
What can most readers do better with in terms of supporting, like, I mean, yes, like, the viewership is going to help. Yes, like, the clicks are going to help in the readership. But, you know, sometimes I talk to friends who are Asian, and I don't think that they are reading or they are clicking. And so what is the responsibility of the audience in all of this? Like, should there be more on them to support this? I mean, yes, you don't have to say it in the headline, like, the visuals speak for itself, but, you know, I hate when people come up to me and say, well, I didn't see the media cover this. I'm like, are you sure? Did you look? Like, you know what I mean? I'm sure you've gotten that too. So what can we do to encourage more readership, more viewership of these stories?
I mean, I do also feel that a lot of the responsibility is on the media. Right now, like, we are dealing with, and especially during the election, I was on this disinformation task force looking into what's going on with our communities and where are they getting their information sources. And it is so wild, I think, what types of narratives end up bubbling up simply because our stories might not be translated. And our communities don't always speak or read English. And then on top of that, a lot of mainstream media outlets don't cover our communities. So what incentive do these communities have to read us in the first place? You know, there has to be a long-term trust. And that's not something that you can just cover, you know, once during Asian Hate and you leave and you kind of, you know, parachute into a tragedy and then you leave and you don't care about these people anymore. You know, it is like such a sustained thing. I also think that, you know, in terms of the Asian American community and those who do, you know, have the skills, have English and understand, you know, what sources, or at least a little bit more of the media literacy, you know, I think that oftentimes as Asian Americans, we take for granted what's going on in the Asian American community. You know, we might say, like, oh, I'm Asian, so, like,
Yeah.
I just know.
Right.
but there is another level of racial literacy that has to happen, because I do think that the idea of Asian America that we've been sold all our lives is extremely flawed, and so I think that looking into stories and actually reading what's on the ground, I think that matters. I think that that's going to change a lot of people's perceptions, including our own, of ourselves. And it's going to take time, but I do think that those are kind of just the biggest issues at this point. It's like there's very little media literacy. There's very, very little, just trust from our communities, and there's, there just needs to be more.
Can I piggyback off what you just said? So to piggyback off of the point she made about having a sustained commitment to the community, right? So I landed at ABC like later than most people do. So I got past the point of like, I have to work here, right? And a lot of newsrooms that would interview me and like, they wanted to like kind of reshape me, and I'm like, F that, like,
Reshape you? Wait, how do they want to reshape you?
Well, like, just like every newsroom has like their own tone, right? And I'm not just saying this because they pay my bills. Keep doing that, please. But ABC was the only newsroom where I interviewed with, and I interviewed with every newsroom in New York and some outside, where they didn't ask me to be something else, right? I remember a question in the interview. It was the most poignant question ever. I was in a coffee shop, and the assistant newsreader says to me, Eyewitness News has been like the #1 brand in local news, forever in New York, but we have not been able to tap in to the AAPI community. Why do you think that is? And I went, oh, okay, we're gonna have this conversation now, okay?
Wow.
So I said, then that's a great, honest question. I'll give you a great, honest answer. Our community doesn't trust you because you don't have a voice that looks like them and sounds like them, and until you do that, it goes both ways, right? And he goes, all right, when can you start, right? So
I mean, love that.
But that's the truth, though. It's incumbent on us. Like, I try not to worry about. I'm not gonna like lecture the audience and the viewership and the readers. It's our job as media outlets to gain their trust and to tell stories that matter to them.
I'll tell you, I've asked other journalists kind of a question like this, and inevitably somebody will blame the audience and say, well, they're not clicking and reading. You both are the first ones that actually, you turn it on, us, ourselves, because we are the creators of the content of the news. So I think that's very telling about just both of your individual philosophies, but of the responsibilities that actually can scale. Before we go on to the last segment, I do want to touch on the current environment, which, as you both well know, DEI is being, it's turned into something that companies have wanted to champion, into something now companies are trying to run away from as quickly as possible because of the threat of political pressure from the government. Do you consider covering AAPI issues as a type of DEI work? Do you consider your work advocacy journalism? And is it sort of a waste of energy to try to convince other people otherwise? I do think that it comes off as advocacy because for a long time the standard of objectivity in a newsroom was whiteness, and then anything else that you cover outside of that, if you cover another community, it sounds, or to other people it seemed like you were advocating for that community, or you were doing, you were their voice, but in reality, you are just, if New York looks like this, then why wouldn't you just cover what New York looks like? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like an omission of Asian America is also a choice. It is it's a choice. So I've always felt that media needs to get away from the idea that whiteness is objectivity, and also just that, we are objective in our reporting. You can report what's going on the ground, and you can report, the facts. You can back everything up with data. You can, get comment and quotes and everything from all sides, and you paint a picture, and what's out there is the picture, I don't think that covering Asian America is advocacy in a way. And I definitely don't consider myself an activist. I just consider myself, just relaying what the accurate picture is. And I think to omit Asian America would be to paint a very inaccurate picture of what we look like. And I don't think that it's,
it's DEI, or I don't think any of this should be considered anything other than just reporting the news.
I had a story years ago where the city of New York, government functions so well sometimes, they gave Netflix a permit to shut down the street to film a show, and subsequently these restaurants located on this strip didn't have their trash collected because the street was closed. Then sanitation fines all these restaurants for the problem that the city caused because sanitation couldn't get down there. That happened to be Chinatown, but that could happen in Harlem, right? So DE&I don't consider it DE&I. Our job is to advocate for the voiceless. That is ultimately what a journalist is. At its purest form, we are a voice for the voiceless. If it so happens that the voiceless look like me, then so be it, but it's not the only community that we advocate for. So yes, we're an advocate, but I'm not an activist, and I don't promote DE&I. We tell human stories that can impact any community, particularly in the city, which there's many of.
I mean, of course, I agree with this. I think, we all know that time is limited, resources are limited. I myself have gotten into trouble for writing a story that was about the Asian American community when somebody thought that I could have spent that time writing something else, right? So this is where my question is coming from, is at that point, I felt like maybe I was doing something wrong because I wasn't doing my quote-unquote job because there was another story that I could have been writing. I mean, as a business journalist, it's a little bit more difficult for me to justify my time writing stories outside of my quote-unquote beat. But I do, wonder if when you're looking at the stories that you could be covering, if you ever prioritize the Asian American community stories, and maybe CeFaan's story, this question is more for you because you cover a broader, and I mean your beat is Asian America, so you maybe don't feel it as much, but if you ever feel like the pressure to prioritize an Asian American story because you know that if you don't do it, no one else will, and if that calls into question your own...
Look, again, I would advocate for anyone that comes to me with a story that's a good story and they truly need the help. It just so happens, because of what I look like, I get a lot of requests from people who look like me, right? That is just, by the way, goes right back to what I'm saying about diversity in newsrooms, right? We are connections to these communities. So, I can't change the way I look, right? And I can't change the way that, people see me. But it doesn't matter what you look like. If you need help and you've been, injustice is what you're dealing with, that's what we do.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add on that I don't think that this is a question that a white reporter is ever asked.
I was just going to say, the question that I'm even asking is a very loaded one already, and it can be seen as pretty targeted.
Yeah, I do think if I were a white journalist and I wrote about Gilmore Girls, people wouldn't be like, oh my God, you favoring white people. You're really prioritizing them, But this is just something that, because we are people of color, that you're just kind of assumed to be advocating or an activist for something, when it's, at the end of the day, I think we're very interested in the truth over anything else.
Yeah.
No, I think she's totally right again, as everything Kimmy says is right, okay?
Yes, that's true.
But
that's true.
to just sort of tackle this from a different angle, I've gotten sort of a different variation of that question, which is, are you ever afraid that you become the token Asian, right? And I say, F no, right? Because again, this is why we do this, right? Because we are champions of the most voiceless. And if this happens to be one of the most voiceless communities out there, then you need to embrace that, right? So yes, I totally agree with that as well. But also you can ask me that question and so what? And what? And so what's your problem with that? And I don't see a problem with that, do you? I mean, my answer, I think, was sufficient. So, the question, she's right. In and of itself, you wouldn't get it as a white journalist, but I can get it, and I do get it, and I'm okay with it, too.
I struggled with the questions for this panel because it's so very meta for me. And as I was writing it, I could feel some of that otherness creeping in and into my questions, because that's what we're talking about, right? And so obviously I mean to pose these all in a very considerate and thoughtful way, but it did strike me, as well as I was thinking about questions to ask you both, that these are questions that I've obviously asked myself, that I've struggled with, but that it can come off putting you in a position that, I would never ask somebody who was white these kinds of questions. So it's observant of you, obviously, that you pointed that out.
Well, you're doing a great job.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I struggle with it.
You're very sensitive about it.
Thank you. I want to bring up our last guest. I also need someone to go get my Uber Eats. I'm not even kidding. I got Uber. Hi. I'll be right there to get the food, and then that'd be great. Thanks. All right. So let me bring up Dave. Dave.
Hello.
Who has just jumped onto the stage. Thank you, Gary. I'm so sorry. This is my habit that I come to New York and I order a lot of food to go back home to New Jersey because we have no good restaurants. Anyway, Dave, who has, I mean, really.
Pockets of New Jersey.
I appreciate my partner, though, who is making all this happen.
There's a lot of good Korean food.
Yeah, I mean, just some...
Depends on where you are.
Orly, Pal Park.
I don't want to say on live stream because people will stalk me. In my town...
Jersey's going to come for you.
In my town, there aren't too many ones that I love. I'm so sorry. I just got so distracted with the food. Hi. Dave is a freelance filmmaker and audio producer. He has worked on hundreds of short-form documentary videos and podcasts. He's worked for CNN, Bloomberg, Vox, and I really wanted to bring Dave up into this because I want to talk about the future of journalism and of having greater representation across the board. And you are on the opposite side of CeFaan in some ways. You're the one manning the camera, but you're still telling stories. And so this last part of the discussion is really about, unfortunately for us, social media has really taken a lot of attention away from our stories. They have the personalities, Kimmy, to use your wording from earlier, to say kind of whatever they want to say. CeFaan was asked if he was an influencer recently of what kind of content he created. And so I want to understand how each of you are dealing and maybe fighting back against the barrage of just stuff that is like news. It looks like news, it kind of moves like news, but it actually isn't created by journalists, and how each of you are sort of dealing with that in your respective fields. So I don't know who wants to take that first.
Mine's easy. I don't worry about it because I got too much to worry about in my life. Okay. My life has enough problems. I don't worry about it.
But you do have a great social media presence yourself. I mean, you make it a point, right?
But if you noticed, what I put, like Kimmy, what I put out there is what makes air, right? Like I don't put a lot of like my personal life. If it's sound enough to make air, it can be reposted on social media. It's vetted. It's fact checked. Like it's not my job to worry about what you do. Like do you, man, whatever.
But do you feel pressure to get on the selfie?
Don't care.
Okay.
Don't care. Like
right.
That's part of being old, right? Like I've gotten to the point where I'm old. Like I don't have the energy.
Right.
It's hard to get up on this stage from where I live.
No, I appreciate that. No, I do.
No, I just don't. Like I don't have the energy. I don't care. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have a solution for this, but I do think it is an issue that a lot of younger people are treating social media as the news. Like I had a conversation with a younger person, and I was like, "Oh, what kind of news outlets do you read? What do you watch?" And he said, "YouTube news."
Yeah.
That was the answer. They don't see the difference between all of these things. They just get on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, whatever it is, and it's all the same to them. Whether it's the well-researched piece from NBC or it's Joe Blow.
Right.
With a webcam.
I mean, but your field specifically, as somebody who takes a lot of time to craft shots and to plan things out. I mean, that's all being kind of crapified, right, with cell phone stuff. Like people just going around.
Crapified, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that has to feel like also some pressure to produce in that sheer quantity. Or do you also, like CeFaan, you don't care? You don't kind of cave into that pressure?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. When I got into it, we were I came into sort of video as. Every newsroom was like, we need to pivot to video, we need to pivot to video. And they were investing a lot of money in this sort of more documentary and these quality sort of like deep storytelling. And I think we're in a position now where these news outlets are needing to go, again, up against influencers and up against Joe Blow with a camera because people don't necessarily care. They're just like consuming. So yeah, I think that is the challenge of like.
Do you feel the pressure?
To
produce a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it comes from, I think, up top, of course, as,
right.
These guys both work for big news.
You got to cut 6 different ways. You have to...
You've got to be on TikTok, and you've got to be on...
Sizing and, yeah.
In fairness, Since you mentioned, like, and you mentioned as well, like, influencer social media, there's not fact checking and whatnot, but we're in this day and age where there's a conversation where the right would argue that, mainstream media is biased and the left would argue that Fox is biased. If you want to look at it that way, everything in the ecosystem to some degree is biased, right? And whether it's fully fact checked and vetted or not, to the point we're making, you're going to sort of pick and choose like what your source is, right? So I don't know that we can even differentiate anymore, other than like we are fully funded by a corporate operation, right, versus Joe Blow. But at the end of the day, like, isn't it just our job to put out really good content? I mean, I don't look at them as a threat so much as just another player entered the game, and we've got to now step it up. I mean, competition is good, right? So you're not going to stop them. Just to add that out there.
No, I mean,
like, we're not perfect, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like the pressure to do more and better, right, to up my own quality, to your point. So I'm with you on that. I think, Kimmy, sometimes I think about when I write articles, I say, am I going to be red or am I going to be the green screen that someone points to behind their head, in social media? And I mean, I'm sure you get that a lot. I'm sure you've seen videos where your story is there and like it's your byline and it's someone's floating head talking about your news. How does that make you feel?
Oh yeah. I mean, it pisses me off for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I think the lesson here is that the youth must go.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Usually it's the
Get 'em outta here.
They can get older.
Yeah,
They
usually
can
it's
just
the
grow
boomers that they
up.
want to go. Right.
No, but I do think that as long as we're doing our thing, and I think a lot of, like, journalism still has, obviously, like, its merits. I think that when it comes to impacting some sort of, tangible change, making a tangible change, I think that there's still a lot of lawmakers that listen and watch us and read us. I think there's still a lot of, older folks too who do get their news from us. Large voting populations that do as well. Like, I do think that there's a lot of merit behind this. And I do think that people, as long as we kind of get through this hump of where there's not much media literacy, as long as we get through this stage, I think the next stage will be people kind of learning, what is and isn't accurate. Like, clearly, they're now learning, if you drink raw milk and stuff like that, you're gonna die. So I think that you just have to go through
Trial
the
and
growing
error.
pains.
The hard way, yeah.
Yeah, you have to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible.
But
Yeah.
we've been having this conversation about the death of media for decades now,
No, of
right?
course.
And what ends up happening in the end, and like, God, I hope Mickey Mouse House is not listening to this. So corporate media like still survives, right? Because it's the big bad. They gobble everything up. Like the New York Times, the local papers, the small ones have all suffered. They've all died and collapsed. I get it, right? The New York Times and Washington Post are doing fine and well, right? And then in the day, ABC, NBC, CBS does well. Because why? Human beings are inherently lazy. I'm just fact, right? This is not objective. This is objective fact, right? We don't have the time to go look at 100 different sources. I love when you hear on the media, then read and watch every different viewpoint. No one's going to do that, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to go back and they're going to lean on the brand that they know. And it happens to be the brand that they know are the big corporate giants, right? So at the end of the day, but the point I'm making is like, so Kimmy stuff is so original, right? That's the thing. Yeah. The content itself is what people, they gravitate towards, right? Why did NBC hire her? Because no one's doing stuff like this, right? So she could go off and do this outside of NBC, and it would still, I would argue, draw eyeballs, right? At the end of the day, the corporate media just sees that, and that's why they just buy it all up, right? Because it's good content that drives it, whether it's Joe Schmo or the Mickey Mouse House, right?
Yeah, I mean, brands take a long time to build, and with the established trust that they have, it's hard for any newcomer to really come and disrupt it, even like HuffPost, right? I mean, you and I have worked at smaller media startups, and as much as we've tried, people are still going to the Journal and ABC News and all of that. I do, though, I'm curious from each of your perspectives, when you look at how recruiting is happening, what can we do to encourage more Asian Americans to come into the field of journalism? I feel like CeFaan makes a lot of trips to AAJA conferences, and he used to be on the media watch committee of AAJA. You and I and Dave, I feel like we're less involved with like AAJA. Like, we know it's there. So I'm curious how you each think about wanting to recruit more people in who are Asian American, because we've all talked about how representation is obviously very important.
it's hard to recommend people to work in media right
Oh,
now.
okay. And what's
It's hard to do that.
Okay.
I also do like, because coming from, you know, a restaurant family, you're also very, very conscious of the fact that we, you know, I don't know if anyone else in here is Fujianese, but we don't have connections here whatsoever, you know? Like, our families are in restaurants. That's what we do. If I want to start a restaurant, I could do that, but like, I can't, like, that's what we have. So whenever I mentor people, you know, I always tell them, like, healthcare, benefits, stability, like, that stuff does matter if you want longevity in this business. It's so hard to go out there and tell people, especially from working class families, to go chase your dreams, because chasing your dreams doesn't really matter if you don't have insurance, you know? Like, it really is very difficult. And so I think that it's, you know, it is a balance. I think this job is so important. I think it's becoming increasingly important. Especially when we talk about, you know, the role of democracy and what it's going to look like in a couple of years. Like, I think it is very, very important. At the same time, I do think that peace is very important, and stability, and, you know, prioritizing yourself and actually making a living. And it is hard to tell people that come from, you know, my background to just take that jump, because, you know, it's hard. And to the extent that I can, I really help, you know, I try to help people, whether it's with writing or whether it's, you know, trying to format their story, or try to organize their stories, or figure out like how to develop better sources. These kind of rote skills I can definitely help with and help them refine. Or if, you know, we get to know each other and they're really great, I can definitely, you know, recommend them for something, things like that. Beyond that, it's hard to say, you know, it is hard to say.
So when you say it's difficult, you mean in all the ways, because the downsides are so much greater in some ways for somebody who doesn't have the same security of being American, and some like deeply connected into like all these communities and okay. I mean, I think the other thing that you mentioned too, like having the network is so important. Like, I have so many friends who are in this field whose, you know, parents were in journalism, like to your point, and have that. Dave, what do you think is the best way for journalists to sell this job to aspiring or journalism curious folks?
Yeah, well, I do agree that, you know, I feel like we're all like, I can't recommend it. You know, the media industry is a churning sea. But I will say, you know, I come from a video production background. I studied film. And I do think, you know, a lot of the young people that I talk to who are in this field, they just do it. They're just going to do it. And I think we can both, you know, all of us identify that, like, we just love telling stories. And there's a whole new generation of people that just love telling stories. And telling them not to get into media is like, you know, you might as well be talking to the wall. Like, if people love it, they're going to get into it, and they're going to find a way to make a living doing it. So I think for me, it's creating work that will ignite that inspiration in someone, that hopefully, you know, some high school kid might see a video that I made and watch it and be like, wow, I want to do it. Because you know, I'm sure we all have work and people who did stuff that we looked at when we were young and said, wow, I want to do that. And so, you know, I would like to be that inspiration for someone who can see not only the person in front of the camera in representation, but look at that credit and say, wow, that's a name that looks like my name.
For sure, I love that.
I think also, just on Dave's point, like, if people have that passion, I think it is on us to kind of pull people up, because we understand at this point what's on the other side. It's really difficult, and to the extent that we can make things a little bit easier for this next generation, like, we're there.
Yeah, I thought you wanted to get rid of them.
I'm a very complicated person.
Complicated.
Go away, but come back. But go away, come back.
Yeah.
I was just playing.
So I have a lot of mentees through AJA, right? And I have a lot that no longer are mentees. And so what I would always say from the outset is, if you want to make money and that is your goal, journalism is not for you. You can make money, and none of us are poor up here, right? But it's not the end game of journalism. That's the first thing. Secondly, if you want to do this for the fame and the glory and because you want to see yourself on TV, there are other ways to be famous. This is not for you, right? Weeds out like 80% of them, right? True story. So then the second part of this then is, if you want to be an agent of change, speak truth to power, and make a damn difference, and you bleed and breathe news, and you give up holidays and weekends and sometimes, a good paycheck, because you got to grind it out, then come talk to me.
And personal safety. I mean, that's something that I feel like.
Life's no fun if it's always safe.
Sorry, I mean, I think for women, I think especially, like you and I, talked about it before, and I don't like to promote where I'm going to be. Like, these are like little things that I just think about, and maybe like if maybe you can relate. And I don't know, I feel like, again, I should have been slapped in the face more when I was little, like being scrappy. Like, you would know how to handle yourself in some ways. But I mean, that was something my parents were worried about, like my personal safety of being out and about all the time as a journalist. One thing though, on the point of kind of fame, and I know none of you do it for that, but I do feel like there have been moments for sure in your career where you've worked on something, maybe there have been several, where you've thought, wow, I'm really making a difference. And so when you go to bed at night and it's a really, really hard day, what are those stories that you recount to remind yourself of the impact that you're making on the toughest days?
That is a hard question, because I actually, I don't know if I do. Like, it's what I mentioned before. I do think that it is a really hard place to be in when you have a job and half of it is tragedy, and I don't want to feel like my career is ever getting better or worse because of someone else's misfortune. So
but that's
I think
news, right? Most news is bad news in some ways.
Yeah, so I think honestly, to me, I kind of just erased myself at the end of the day, and I divorced myself because I think a lot of it, even when there is change, and there definitely has been on many occasions, I think when those things happen, it's very fleeting. The happiness, because there is so much more to do, and there's always more, and I don't want to sound like oh, I'm such a good person, but no, I do think it's hard I think it's to stay in this business, you almost have to not remind yourself of what you did the day before.
Wow.
And just keep going.
I don't know if that's the opposite of what you were saying earlier, because CeFaan, you were saying like you let it in. So does Kimmy sound like she's blocking
That's dark.
it? Oh, yeah. I'm trying to, because you had made such a stark contrast earlier of like.
I think my answer is different because I work in local news, and the beauty of local news is you're on TV every day, right? And so you have a chance to, I guess, in some ways, like reset, right? To the point that she's making, I don't think every day you go to bed and you wake up going, did I change anything today? You want to tell a good story, but I think the fact is when I'm on TV every day, you get a chance that it just so happens to happen, right? And it does refresh you. So for instance, the past 2 weeks has been a weird news cycle in New York, right? I've been at like Newark Airport with all the problems, not exactly changing anyone's life, right? Unless I've told you to avoid it.
It changed
And
my life.
Yeah.
I'm only going to LaGuardia now.
In a small way, right? There was a new pope that was named. That didn't really count. The mayor of Newark was arrested by ICE. Didn't really count. Monday, there was a guy who was hit and run driver. The cops were doing nothing about it. Happened to be Korean. I think I helped that guy a little bit, even if it was just he felt like he was heard and he mattered, right? Tragedy the next day, 16-year-old killed by innocent, stray bullet, that didn't count. And then, of course, we're NJ Transit strike. So I just named for you like a week and a half, and I got one, right? And so there's an expression in local news where you say, not every day is an Emmy, right? You just, like any job, not every day is going to be great, right? Not saying that these days are bad, but even if your goal, what drives you is to change or to help someone, it doesn't mean every day you get that, but you'll get it, every so often, and you'll be reminded of that.
I will say the one thing to me that's like very satisfying is at the end of the day when you feel like you've told the truth in the full story, you're like, okay, this is out there now.
Yeah.
It wasn't before.
That no one knew
it's
about
out
before,
there now.
right?
Yeah, and that's the part where like I am proud of, and I think we can all probably.
Because it takes a lot of work to get it out there is what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
To me, I love getting a message when I've done a story that I'm really proud of, and it's out there, and someone sends a positive message, and they come from an experience that's very different on the surface from that story I was telling, a personal story. And I think that just having that connective tissue, especially like telling Asian American stories. I have a podcast where I interview Asian musicians, and we'll get a lot of messages from folks from Jewish backgrounds, from Latino backgrounds, and they say how much this person's story resonated with them. And to me, that's it. That's like bridging those cultures and bridging, that human understanding. And like you guys were talking about earlier about like telling Asian stories outside of the Asian community. And to me, hearing how it resonates out there that's, to me almost, it means a lot. Yeah.
What's the podcast? That sounds like
It's called
a cool
Golden
idea.
Hour. Yeah, we interview Asian musicians. We're currently on hiatus. But yeah, you can check it out on wherever you find podcasts.
I think I will.
Yeah.
Last question is really how each of you decide which stories you want to tell. I mean, there are so many. So is it based on urgency? Is it based on I don't know if it's like somebody that you have a deeper relationship with and you know that you can get a really good interview from. I think a lot of times people from the Asian communities see me and they say, oh, well, here's somebody who can just do an Asian story. And then I get that kind of presumption, and it just, sometimes it can be fun to entertain, but sometimes it can be a little irritating to think that, like, it's an assumed thing, that just because I'm Asian, I'll do your story.
Yeah, I think for me, because I am on the immigration and universities beat at the moment, it is very much like urgency,
Yeah.
like holy crap, like this is, it's been
Yeah.
bad lately. It's been really busy. But when it comes to, individual stories and things like that, I think that a lot of us have developed relationships with communities over an extended period of time. And so when there is an alarm to sound, I think that people know who they can, count on, who they can leak to, who they can talk to. I often check in with a lot of different people on the ground to make sure, do you think there's anything that the media is missing right now? And I think that that's kind of where it all comes from. So urgency and a lot of that.
Yeah. How do you decide, Dave, which stories you want to cover?
Well, as the resident mixed race kid up here, I love being the token Asian.
Okay.
Because I feel like I got my Asian badge. I'm like,
Aw.
okay, I'm part of the club. So I'll take it.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of how do you decide which
Yeah, I mean,
stories
you
to
were
tell?
working on a lot. I know Golden Hour's on hiatus, but and Kimmy mentioned something earlier that I thought was really beautiful, is that through her journalism, she gained confidence. And I'm wondering if you're working on anything. This is a planted question, by the way. If you're working on anything right now that is also really near and dear to you, but it's helping you, right, with your own personal journey.
Yeah, well, I think I had a similar experience where getting to tell Asian stories and dig into sort of the Asian community and the media community, Asian documentary community, sort of really helped me with my own sort of identity journey. But yeah, during the pandemic, I went freelance, and I actually started filming with the very organization that is hosting this panel, Welcome to Chinatown. So I just started, I've been filming with them for the past 2 years. And following their journey as they've built the very building that we are in right now, and currently working on that as a feature documentary.
Yeah, it's very meta, and this is not endorsed by Welcome to Chinatown. So I want to be very clear. This is an independent project that Dave.
They aren't paying me.
Yeah, this is an independent journalistic documentary project that Dave has embarked on. I think and I know Vic doesn't like the attention, but she really deserves it. One of the reasons why I even have this show, not only here physically, but that I launched during the pandemic, was because I saw someone like me, a young woman who was working in corporate, launch a nonprofit. And seeing her do it successfully, I was like, wow, maybe I could do something that was also mission-driven. And so I'm excited to partner with Dave. I'll be a producer on the documentary. It's something that I want to do because I believe very heavily in having physical spaces and building community through connections like this, right? I mean, like I've said before multiple times, I've been a fan of Kimmy and CeFaan's for so long, but I've actually never been able to meet them. And this is like my all access pass, like my journalism. I can use my journalism press credentials to interview them. And, I think that's like a big privilege that I have, and I want to be able to, tell stories from that perspective as well. And this is also the time that I want to bring Vic up to thank her and to celebrate. I have something for each of you, by the way. So you are my media heroes, so I printed you all Media Hero press passes. It's a little sticker.
That's cute.
That's very cool, actually.
And where's yours, CeFaan?
I
Here
don't
you
think
are.
NYPD will
They-
honor this, but I'll try.
Yeah, I don't think so. These are for you to toast yourselves. Little by Joe.
This is actually very cool.
I know.
By
I'm like
Joe.
for each of you.
Oh, that's so exciting.
And I printed out multiple. Oh my gosh, this is so. It looks so clumsy on camera. I'm sorry. Do you have?
That's live
okay,
TV,
here we
baby.
go. And Harry. Happy birthday to Welcome to Chinatown. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Got some champagne and some gender reveal balloons. I did not anticipate for it to look like that.
It's a girl.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, I really, this whole show was just like meant to do this for our, because there was so much pain during the pandemic. And I was like so tired of it. And I was like, there's got to be other things to talk about. And so this is my way of celebrating all of you and appreciating your work. And you as well, Vic. Thank you for hosting this. And yeah, so enjoy your dinner. They didn't have the number 5. But do you want to, like, I want you to plug Welcome to Chinatown. I mean, we're live on the internet with probably 4 viewers. Woo! Oh, wow. That was awesome. But yeah, I just really want you to give yourself credit for all that you've built over the last 5 years.
Oh, thank you, Hope. I don't. I feel like I have like too much to say because I'm like kind of always like shy about it. I think that this has just been like a really incredible, like meaningful experience to really kind of like intimately understand my neighborhood, understand my community, and also be able to like connect with incredible individuals like all of you here. Such like admiration for your work. I mean, for CeFaan, you know, all that you do to help cover what's happening with the jail, spotlight, that such something that's going to have such deep impact. Dave, you've been around for 2 years, just kind of hanging around.
Just hanging around. That's documentary.
But no, it's
Waiting
been,
for something to happen.
it's been so fun to get to know you. And then Kimmy, I'm a huge fan of your work and like our staff. We read your stories, like we look at the data that, you know, the research and like how deep and clearly informative that your work is. Also really cool you're a Yankees fan. Huge Yankees fan
We
too.
won today.
And then Hope, yeah, just you know, just such an incredible friend, and just deep admiration for your work. So, yeah, it's just clearly.
The whole cake and everything, but no, thank you for the space. I think it's really important that we have physical spaces like this, and I know how much hard work you've put into this physically, and it's just great to be with you. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I know you're so busy, and I know you don't do this very often, but seriously, it was a true honor and privilege to be able to meet you guys tonight for the very first time and to really say thank you in person. And just like love you all. And Dave, looking forward to working on this documentary together.
Can't wait.
Everyone follow all of the socials of everyone here. We have them up in the graphics. And thank you all for coming out tonight on this rainy night. Good night. Thank you. Bye. Yay.
Congrats. You're starting kindergarten with 5. That's so cool.